He said it like he was asking me to pass the salt. "We don't have space for you, Mom." I looked up from the mug I was rinsing, half expecting him to smile, to catch the words before they landed and say something like, "I didn't mean it like that," or, "Let me rephrase." But nothing came, just the soft drip of the kitchen faucet and the weight of his sentence settling into the room like winter air. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. I nodded once. Not in agreement, not in anger, just to say I'd heard him. Then I dried my hands on the old dish towel that still smelled faintly of lavender and turned toward the hallway. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask questions. I just walked back to the small room downstairs that Brittany had once jokingly called the guest nook and started folding my things. The house was in Maple Hollow, tucked between a retired apple orchard and the old Baptist church, in one of those Vermont neighborhoods where everyone plants marigolds in spring and pretends winter doesn't hurt. A 4-bedroom colonial with gray shutters, white trim, and a wraparound porch I'd helped repaint last October. Andrew and Brittany had called it their forever home. Funny how forever lasted 14 months. I packed quickly. 2 worn suitcases, one soft-sided, the zipper stitched back together after a TSA incident in 2013, and a smaller carry-all that held only 3 things. A folded quilt from the linen chest in my old bedroom, a hardback copy of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and a photo of my late husband, Walter. He looked young in that picture. We both did. We were standing in front of the old Camry, arms slung around each other's backs like the future couldn't touch us. I hesitated with the frame in my hand. For a moment, I almost left it on the shelf. Let the past stay with the walls I once scrubbed and the stairs I once vacuumed, but then I thought no, Walter should come with me. As I zipped the suitcase closed, my fingers brushed against something harder than fabric at the bottom, the red folder. I'd nearly forgotten it was there. The edges had gone soft with age, but the contents inside were still crisp. A certified copy of the deed to this very house, stamped with both our names, mine and Andrew's. 49% in black ink under my legal name, Margaret L. Carter. A quiet investment, a gesture of faith. Something I had signed the week Walter died, still in the fog of grief, still believing Andrew would never make me regret it. I slid the folder deeper, beneath sweaters I hadn't worn since November. I wasn't going to use it, not yet. Not unless I had to. Brittany was upstairs. I could hear her walking from one end of the bedroom to the other, her steps sharp and unhurried. She didn't come down. Maybe she knew what Andrew was saying to me. Maybe she didn't care. I didn't stop to find out. The sun was beginning to fall low behind the maple trees when I stepped outside. The porch light hadn't flicked on yet, and the lawn was covered in that soft amber haze that makes everything look more peaceful than it really is. I didn't say goodbye. Not to the wind chimes or the hummingbird feeder I'd hung near the kitchen window, or to the house itself, though I'd memorized every creak in its floors. I texted for a cab. While I waited, I stood beneath the dogwood tree Walter and I had planted on our first visit to Maple Hollow, the one Andrew had promised to water. The ground beneath it looked dry. I didn't mention it. When the cab arrived, the driver didn't ask questions. Just loaded my bags into the trunk and turned on the heat without a word. I climbed into the back seat and stared straight ahead. The house grew smaller in the side mirror, its shutters shutting me out one last time, and still, I said nothing. But inside my chest, something had shifted. Not like glass breaking, more like a latch coming loose. The kind you don't notice until the door starts to swing. I never told Walter what I did with the insurance money. Not because I was hiding it, he was already gone by then. But because if he had been alive, I think he would have said no. It came through on a Thursday. A pale blue envelope from the life insurance company, almost apologetic in tone. Inside, a check for $190,000, the final sum, after paperwork, waiting periods, and one final phone call confirming cause of death. Complications from a bypass surgery that was supposed to give us 5 more years. 5 more Christmases, 5 more walks past the apple orchard, 5 more mornings of coffee brewed too strong because he never measured the grounds. I stared at the check for a long time. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like silence with a $sign. That same weekend, Andrew called. Not to ask how I was holding up grief was something he never learned how to name, but to say the house they'd fallen in love with had slipped through their fingers. The bank had pulled their pre-approval after a debt-to-income adjustment, whatever that meant. Brittany was crying. He was trying to be strong. "We just needed a little more down," he said. "A safety cushion, something that shows we're serious buyers." I didn't even ask how much, didn't ask if he'd talked to other lenders. I just said, "I'll cover it." He paused. "You sure?" "I am," I said. "It's your future. Walter would want it." He didn't push back. Not really. The next day, I wired the funds directly, $190,000 full balance, into the escrow account. The realtor called me personally to confirm. "That's real love," she said. "Most folks wouldn't hand that kind of money over without blinking." I blinked. Just nod at her. They moved in 3 weeks later, all smiles and scented candles. Brittany wore a sweatshirt that said homebody, and Andrew insisted on giving me a tour, even though I'd already been inside 3 times during inspection. They stopped at the downstairs guest room. "This is yours," Brittany said, clasping her hands together like she was offering me a sanctuary. "Always. You'll always have a home with us, Margaret." At the time, I believed her. The way you believe wedding vows at 20. The way you believe the dog will come home if you leave the gate open. The room was small, barely wide enough to fit the twin bed they'd thrifted from someone's Airbnb clearance sale. There was no closet. A plastic dresser stood in the corner with a single lamp, the kind that hummed when you touched the chain too fast. The bathroom was a half-bath toilet and sink, no shower, and the only mirror was warped from years of heat damage. When I looked into it, my face bent like water. But I told myself it didn't matter. I'd always lived simple. Walter and I had raised Andrew in a 3-bedroom ranch with wood paneling and radiators that never turned off. We'd made do with less. At least here, the floorboards were even. The coffee was hot, and there were voices in the morning. After Walter passed, the silence had stretched too wide. My days were measured by the sound of the mail slot. My nights filled with static from a radio I kept on just to pretend someone was speaking. In those first few weeks at the new house, I reveled in the hum of footsteps upstairs, the clatter of dishes, the occasional burst of laughter from the TV. Brittany liked to leave on in the background. I didn't need much, just the comfort of knowing I was still part of something. Andrew brought me coffee the first few mornings, lukewarm and too sweet, but thoughtful. Brittany offered to show me how to use the Wi-Fi thermostat, though her tone was clipped, like a school teacher tired of repeating instructions. Still, I thanked her. I thanked both of them for every small gesture, even when it came with sighs. We had dinner together once. Brittany made pasta, and I offered to do the dishes. She said no, but I did them anyway. Old habits. The next day, they left early for a brunch I wasn't invited to. I spent the afternoon folding towels that weren't mine, wiping down the counters no one asked me to clean, straightening couch pillows that never quite stayed centered. I thought I was being helpful. I thought maybe they just needed time to adjust. A week passed, then 2. The warmth started to peel. The voices in the morning became doors closing gently, deliberately. The thermostat mysteriously glitched, and I woke up shivering in mid-February. My tea bags went missing from the cupboard. The fridge began to fill with color-coded meal prep containers I was told not to move. When I asked if I could hang a shelf in the laundry room for my detergent, Andrew said nothing, just rubbed the back of his neck like I'd asked him to rearrange the roof. Still, I didn't say a word. I told myself every new household had growing pains. That I was lucky, really. Some people ended up in senior facilities where no one even remembered their birthdays. At least here, someone still knew my name. But every night, I tucked that quilt under my chin, stared up at the ceiling stained faintly yellow from a leak no one bothered to patch, and wondered, what happens when you give everything to a child who forgets how to say thank you? What happens when "you'll always have a home with us" becomes a line no one remembers saying? What happens when you finally realize you were never really welcome in the first place? It didn't happen all at once. Nothing ever does. It started with the refrigerator. One afternoon, I came upstairs with a bowl of strawberries to chill and found a silver padlock across the handles of the main fridge. I blinked at it, then stepped back as if I'd walked into someone else's kitchen. Brittany noticed me standing there and, without even looking up from her phone, said, "Oh, that's for meal prep. I'm doing this thing with macros and timing, so it just helps keep everything organized. You can still use the one downstairs." The one downstairs was a dorm-sized mini fridge wedged into the laundry room, plugged into an extension cord behind the ironing board. Its shelves barely fit a carton of milk and a leftover container. I nodded anyway. "Of course," I said. A few days later, the Wi-Fi stopped working in the guest room. I tried resetting my tablet. I tried restarting my phone. Still nothing. I asked Andrew about it, and he mumbled something about moving the modem into his upstairs office. "Better signal for work," he said. "I'll get you the password again later." He never did. Netflix began buffering endlessly. The weather app wouldn't load. My emails went unread, not because I didn't want to reply, but because I couldn't. The house grew quieter, or maybe I just grew invisible. I tried not to let it sting. I bought a small radio from the pharmacy and tuned it to the local AM station. They played old swing music on Sunday nights. It helped. Andrew stopped joining for dinner. At first, he claimed work ran late. Then he started eating upstairs. I'd hear the creak of the floor above just as I was setting out plates. Brittany would come down, peer at the food and say, "I already ate, but thanks." Her voice always carried that sugary tone people use when they want to sound polite, but can't be bothered to mean it. Still, I cooked. Still, I folded their towels and straightened their shoes by the door and refilled the salt shaker without being asked. I thought I was being respectful, giving space, keeping out of the way. But with every small courtesy, I became less visible, as if being quiet, being grateful, being helpful was somehow making me easier to erase. One morning, Brittany had friends over for brunch. I stayed in my room, not wanting to intrude. I heard laughter from the dining area, the clinking of cutlery, the pop of a champagne cork. Then Brittany's voice, light, almost gleeful, floated down the hallway. "It's like living with 2 kids and a grandma." They all laughed. I smiled at the wall in front of me, though I'm not sure why. Maybe to keep from crying. Maybe just to remind myself that I still could. That afternoon, I offered to vacuum the stairs. Brittany looked up from her laptop, raised one brow and said, "You know, sometimes it's hard to have a third person in a young couple's rhythm. It shifts the energy." I nodded like I understood, but the words "third person" echoed longer than I expected. Like a title, like a warning. I began to notice how often I wasn't included. Grocery lists I used to help write now appeared taped to the fridge with Brittany's handwriting alone. They stopped mentioning weekend plans. I'd hear keys jingle at the door, and then the silence after it clicked shut behind them. No knock. No, we're heading out. Once, when I asked Andrew if we could all have dinner together that Sunday, just like old times, maybe lasagna and a movie, he sighed and said, "We've got a lot on our plate right now. Brittany's got deadlines, and I've been drained. Let's play it by ear." We never played anything. And Sunday passed like every other day with the sound of footsteps overhead and the ticking clock beside my bed. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I'd gone to the kitchen early to make tea. It was still dark outside, and the house was wrapped in the kind of quiet I used to love, the kind that made everything feel suspended. As I reached for the kettle, I heard voices, not loud, not angry, but deliberate. They were in the hallway, just around the corner. I recognized Andrew's tone first, low and strained. "She won't leave if we keep being nice," he said. There was a pause. Brittany replied, sharper. "She won't sign over her share unless she feels unwanted. We have to make it uncomfortable. She'll go on her own." I stood still. The kettle hadn't boiled yet, but my hands were already shaking. I stared at the wallpaper near the stove, the same wallpaper I helped pick out 3 weeks ago when Brittany couldn't decide between vintage dusk and muted prairie. They'd asked for my opinion, smiled when I chose, called it classy. Now the print looked like ash. I stepped back, careful not to make a sound. carried the cold kettle into the laundry room and closed the door behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat on the washer, clutching the steel like it might anchor me. They weren't going to ask me to leave. That would be too direct, too honest. They were going to suffocate me with courtesy, crowd me out with passive smiles and locked doors, make the walls close in just enough that I'd find my own way out, and then they'd say they never told me to go. That was the plan. And that night, as I lay in bed with my quilt tucked to my chin and the glow of the hallway light dimmed behind the closed door, I realized something that left me colder than the February air leaking through the window. My son wasn't confused. He wasn't cornered. He wasn't in over his head. He was complicit. That evening, I cooked chicken pot pie, the kind Andrew used to beg for when he lost a tooth, or when his Little League team lost 12-0 and he came home with a scraped knee and tear-streaked cheeks. I didn't follow a recipe. I never had to. My hands remembered what my heart no longer trusted: flour, butter, the chilled cubes of shortening, the rhythm of folding dough until it flaked between my fingers. I diced carrots and peas, chopped thyme from the pod on the porch that Brittany had forgotten to water, and stirred a roux until it turned golden and thick. The smell filled the house, buttery, rich, nostalgic. The kind of smell that used to bring Andrew out of his room, asking how long until dinner. I set the table for 3, just like I had when he was 12 and Walter worked late. Plates side by side, forks turned inward, cloth napkins folded, because I still believed in small gestures, even if no one else noticed. The oven chimed. I pulled the pie out carefully, crust bubbling at the edges, steam curling in the cold kitchen air. I cut 3 neat slices and served them, one for Andrew, one for Brittany, one for me. Then I waited, first 5 minutes, then 10. I listened for footsteps, a voice from upstairs. And even a creak in the hallway. Nothing came. I texted Andrew, "Dinner's ready." No reply. Brittany's music played faintly from the bedroom, something electronic and hollow. I knocked gently once, then opened the door an inch. "I made pot pie," I said softly. She didn't turn. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "I already ate." I nodded, though she couldn't see it, and closed the door again. Back at the table, I sat down. Steam still rose from the plate across from me, Andrew's plate untouched. I ate slowly, carefully. Let the crust crumble in my mouth. Took tiny bites as if stalling would buy time, as if the act of chewing could delay what I already knew. No one was coming. I finished half the slice, then pushed the plate away. The rest stayed there, congealing under the soft light above the table. The kitchen felt too big, all of a sudden cavernous in a way that no longer comforted me. I stared across the table and imagined a boy with grass-stained jeans and front teeth missing. The way he used to tell knock-knock jokes until he wheezed from laughter. The way he once taped a "Do Not Disturb Science in Progress" sign on his bedroom door when he was building a baking soda volcano. Where had that boy gone? When had he become someone who avoided eye contact? Who whispered strategies about how to make me leave without asking me to? My chest tightened, not with anger, but with a grief that felt shapeless, like mourning someone who's still alive. After I rinsed the plate and scrubbed the casserole dish, I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same apron I'd had since 1992, pale yellow with one torn strap and a faded sunflower in the corner. I reached under the bed and pulled out a shoebox. One of the old ones from Walter's sneakers, back when he still walked the dog every morning. Inside were every birthday card Andrew had ever made me. Some were just scribbles on printer paper. Others had glitter, macaroni, those sponge stickers you find at dollar stores. One had a traced outline of his hand, labeled "Mom's Hero." Another had the words, "I love you even more than peanut butter," written in crooked second-grade handwriting. I didn't cry. I just sat there, flipping through them like photographs from a past I could almost touch. They still smelled like crayons. For a moment, I let myself believe he might knock on my door, say he was sorry, say he forgot the time and could we please reheat the pie. But the hallway stayed silent. Eventually, I put the lid back on the box. I wrapped it in a scarf and tucked it into the bottom of my suitcase beneath the sweaters. beneath the photo of Walter, beneath the red folder with our names side by side. I zipped it closed slowly, pressing my palm against the top like sealing a memory shut. Outside, the wind picked up. I could hear the old porch swing groan on its chain, even though no one sat on it anymore. In the distance, a train horn sounded faint and lonely. I used to love that sound. It made me feel connected to something moving, something larger than the small life I led. But tonight, it just made me feel like I'd already left, even though my feet were still on the floor. I turned off the lamp, laid down, and stared at the ceiling for hours, waiting for the moment I'd stop hoping they'd come downstairs. It never came. The next morning, the house was silent. Not in the peaceful way it sometimes had been with coffee brewing and a podcast murmuring upstairs, but in a dense, purposeful way. The kind of silence that fills a courtroom before a verdict. I was slicing strawberries in the kitchen when Brittany walked in. Her arms were folded, hair pulled back tight, face unreadable. "Linda," she said, though she hadn't called me by my first name since the wedding, "we think it might be time for you to start looking for something more permanent." She didn't wait for a response. "You know, your own space, something comfortable, for you." A beat passed. The stainless steel blade touched the cutting board again and again, but I didn't feel my hands move. Then Andrew walked in, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. He didn't even glance at me. "We don't have space for you anymore, Mom." He said it like he was reading a weather report. And just like that, the part of me that had been waiting, hoping for a reversal, a kindness, a human moment fell away like the last leaf in October. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, turned to face them both, and smiled. Not wide, not fake, just still. "All right," I said. "I'll be out by tonight." Brittany blinked. Andrew nodded, already turning away. "Thanks, Mom." No one asked where I'd go. No one offered to help with bags. No one followed me down the hall. I packed with the efficiency of someone who had done it before. My suitcase opened like a breath. Inside, clothes folded with care, the framed photo of Walter wrapped in a sweater, the shoebox of birthday cards tucked in a corner like a heartbeat. At the bottom, just beneath a pair of wool socks I hadn't worn since the first frost, was the red folder. It was worn at the corners. One flap had a small tear, taped hastily years ago, but the papers inside were pristine. A notarized copy of the deed, signatures still sharp, dates clear, margins wide. My name beside Andrew's 49% co-owner of the house I had just been asked to leave. I ran my fingers along the edge of the document, not out of vindictiveness, but to remind myself that I hadn't imagined it, that I existed here legally, financially, physically, even if they had begun pretending otherwise. I slid it back in, gently. Then I closed the suitcase and zipped it with both hands, feeling the faint resistance of the teeth lining up before they sealed. The room I was leaving behind had already begun to forget me. The sheets were still warm. The air smelled faintly of lavender and starch, but the silence was no longer safety, it was surveillance. I stood for a moment longer, one hand on the doorknob, and then I stepped out. The cab arrived on time, a small silver sedan with a driver who didn't ask questions. I appreciated that. We drove past the familiar corners, the drugstore where I used to buy Andrew's allergy medicine, the diner with the sun-faded early bird special sign, the public library where Brittany had once insisted we get cards together. The town looked the same, only I had changed. The motel sat by the edge of Lake Whitmore, a short, square building with green trim and vinyl chairs bolted to the walkway outside each room. It wasn't much, but it was clean. The kind of place that welcomed people who didn't want to be noticed. I'd booked the room a week earlier, not because I knew, but because something inside me had whispered, "Be ready." The woman at the front desk handed me a key card and a form with a yellow highlighter mark where I needed to initial. I paid in cash 3 nights and declined housekeeping. I didn't want anyone seeing what little I had. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something older, maybe the curtains, maybe memory. There was a microwave, a small fridge, a lamp with a flickering bulb, and a window that looked out at the parking lot and, just beyond it, the still gray water of the lake. I set my bags down gently. I didn't unpack. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, the red folder clutched in my lap like a newborn, and stared at the wall. I didn't cry, I didn't curse, I didn't even shake, I just breathed. Then I lay back on the stiff mattress, folded my hands across my chest, and stared up at the ceiling, listening to the hum of a place that didn't expect anything from me. No performance, no politeness, no accommodation, just four walls, a key, and silence, the kind I hadn't had in months. The call came the next morning, just after 9. I was halfway through my second cup of weak motel coffee, staring at the lake through a window too small to frame anything properly, when the phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a second, I thought of letting it ring, but something in me said, "Pick up." "Mrs. Carter?" a voice said, formal but cautious. "My name is Brad. I'm with Whitmore County Lending Services. You're listed as a co-owner on a property at 17 East Rowan Street." I didn't say anything at first. "Yes," I said finally. "That's correct." He cleared his throat. "I'm calling to inform you that your property is currently in default. A loan in the amount of $95,000 was taken out against it 6 months ago. The borrower, Mr. Andrew Carter, has missed 4 consecutive payments. We've sent 3 formal notices and issued a breach warning last Friday. Unless resolved, foreclosure proceedings will begin this coming Friday." The words didn't register all at once. They landed out of order. Loan, breach, foreclosure. Andrew. My son had mortgaged the house behind my back. Collateral, Brad had said, which meant Andrew had used the property as leverage, and with my name on the deed, that leverage was part mine. That silence I'd chosen when I handed over my portion of the life insurance it had turned into permission. I could feel my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "Can you tell me what the loan was for?" I asked. "According to the documents," Brad said, "it was a business line of credit, startup capital." Of course. Andrew had mentioned something about branding, about a local marketing app that would change how small towns connected. Brittany had made a slideshow. I'd seen it once, half-finished, during a barbecue in the backyard. That was 5 months ago. "What happened to it?" "It folded," he said. 3 months in. He didn't sound surprised. I sat back in the plastic motel chair, stared at the burn mark on the tabletop from someone else's cigarette, and imagined the pieces. Andrew hiding letters, Brittany smiling through missed payments, the padlock on the fridge, the sudden shift from inconvenience to eviction. They hadn't just wanted me gone, they needed me gone. Because as long as I was there, I was a variable, a voice, a signature, a witness. And they couldn't afford witnesses when the walls started cracking. Brad gave me options. I could cover the loan. I could refinance. I could sign a waiver of claim and allow the house to move to foreclosure without contest. Each path sat before me like a hallway with a single door at the end, and none of those doors led home. "I'll need the paperwork sent to my email," I said quietly. Within the hour, it arrived. A PDF file with 3 attachments and instructions. I printed them out in the motel lobby. The woman at the front desk didn't ask questions, just handed me the pages warm from the tray. I thanked her. She nodded. People like her have seen enough to know when not to speak. Back in my room, I placed the papers on the desk, right beneath the humming light, and opened the red folder. My name was there, crisp as ever. Co-owner, contributor, collateral. I pulled out the pen I used to sign Andrew's very first field trip form in 2nd grade, a blue ballpoint, slightly worn. It felt heavy in my hand. Then, without rushing, I signed each line, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because some things deserve to fall apart. Because sometimes, the most honest love you can give someone is the freedom to feel the full weight of their choices. I scanned the signed forms, sent them back. Within 30 minutes, Brad called again. "We'll proceed," he said. "Thank you for your cooperation." I didn't answer. I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and folded my hands. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't cry or call a friend. I didn't go online and search for lawyers or write long posts about betrayal. I didn't update my sister or ask the church prayer group for comfort. I just sat there, inside a room no one knew I was in, and listened to the hum of silence I had been denied for so long, a silence no one could steal. Later that evening, I walked 2 blocks to a small grocery store and bought peanut butter, crackers, instant coffee, and a bottle of red wine with a paper label and a twist-off cap. That night, I toasted myself, not in celebration, not in revenge, but in something quieter, relief, the kind that comes from knowing you finally stopped swimming toward a shore that was never meant for you. They thought I wouldn't do it, that I couldn't, but they forgot the one truth I never let go of. I had already lost everything once before. Walter, the life we built, the home we shared. And in that loss, I'd learned that survival isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go. And this was the last thread. It started with a video. Brittany, standing in front of a U-Haul, mascara smudged, eyes red, a baby bump faint beneath her oversized sweater. Wind tousled her perfectly undone hair as she stared solemnly into the camera. A cardboard sign rested against her hip. Evicted by my mother-in-law. The caption read, "When the person who raised your husband destroys your family overnight, pray for us." Family drama, #pregnant and homeless, #betrayed by blood. I watched it once. From the motel room's flickering television, Brittany had reposted the clip to every social platform she owned. It had nearly 80,000 views in 2 days. Comments flooded in like a burst pipe. Some people just want to control their kids forever. This is why boundaries matter. "You're so strong, Brittany. Sending love." No one knew me, but they knew enough to hate me. Somewhere between the crying and the captions, I had become a caricature, the bitter old woman, the toxic in-law, the villain who threw out a pregnant couple onto the street. They didn't need context. The internet never does. I didn't reply. I didn't post my side, didn't screen record the footage, didn't comment on her thread or DM her with threats or legal warnings. Instead, I opened my red folder, the deed with my name beside Andrew's, the transfer slip $190,000, cleared and stamped, the loan breach letter from Whitmore Lending, the foreclosure notice with dates, penalties, warnings. I took photographs of every page, then I added screenshots. Brittany's text, "Once she's gone, we can finally plan the nursery." Andrew's message from the day I left, "Thanks, Mom." The email from Brad at the bank, confirming default. Even the padlock on the refrigerator, I saved them all. And then I opened a blank message addressed to the Burlington Voice, a small but respected local publication known for its investigations into real estate and elder care ethics. Subject line, "Since they want to talk, let's talk." I didn't write an essay, I didn't even include an introduction, just the facts, the trail of paper and proof, the silent history they had tried to bury beneath hashtags and pity likes. I hit send. Then I turned off the lights, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window in the dark. The motel hum buzzed in the walls. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed and a man cursed at the cold. I didn't flinch. Not anymore. I remembered what my father used to say. If someone throws mud, don't jump in the puddle. Let it dry, then sweep it away. So I let the internet talk. Let strangers stitch together a version of me based on a girl crying into her phone. But the truth was out there now, not as revenge, but as record. By the next evening, someone from the Burlington Voice replied. A woman named Emily Hayes, an editor. Her message was short. "We believe you. Would you be willing to go on record? We'll publish this as a feature, but only with your consent." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Yes, as long as you include this line at the top, this is not revenge, this is clarity." She agreed. The article was scheduled for Sunday morning. That night, I slept 8 uninterrupted hours for the first time in months. No creaks above my head, no second-guessing the thermostat, no waiting for a footstep that never arrived. Just me and the sound of the wind off Lake Whitmore and the quiet steadiness of a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for being right. It was just past 7 p.m. when the knock came. I was in pajama pants and halfway through a cup of peppermint tea, curled up on the scratchy motel bedspread, when I heard it 3 firm taps on the door. I didn't move right away. I've lived long enough to know that hesitation is sometimes a form of self-defense. The room held still with me. Another knock. I crossed the room slowly, heart steady, not racing. I looked through the peephole and blinked. Brittany. She stood outside, makeup smeared, hair unwashed, a newborn bundled in a pale pink blanket resting against her chest. A diaper bag swung from one shoulder, overstuffed and glossy. She looked like the final scene of a movie I hadn't agreed to watch. "Margaret?" she called gently. "It's me. Please, just 5 minutes." I cracked the door no more than 2 inches. She didn't step closer. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "We don't know what to do anymore. Josh is falling apart. We were kicked out of the rental we found, failed the credit check. Please, can I come in?" I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I opened the door and stepped aside. She entered slowly, cautious like someone stepping into a museum exhibit. The room didn't offer much: one chair, one bed, one lamp, but she glanced around as if assessing where best to place the drama. She lowered herself to the edge of the bed and bounced the baby gently. "She's yours too," she whispered. "Her name's Emily." I hadn't known. I hadn't wanted to know. Hearing it now felt like swallowing gravel. "Don't shut us out," she added. I nodded once, not in agreement, just acknowledgement. "We really screwed up," she went on. "I said things I didn't mean. We were scared, you know. Stupid. Josh is too proud to admit it, but he's drowning. We both are. Our accounts are frozen. We're over 10 grand in debt. We're running out of phones and time." I watched her lower lip quiver, her fingers adjust the baby's hat like she needed something small to control. But then I saw it, a tag hanging from the diaper bag. Posh Baby, retail brand. Not a thrift find. Not a hand-me-down. New. Nearly $900 in the window display I'd passed at the shopping plaza. "That's new," I said, pointing to the bag. She flinched, just slightly. It was a gift. From a friend. Her voice was too quick. I didn't respond. I just stood and walked to the window. The blinds were half drawn. Outside, a black SUV idled at the curb. Clean. No dents. Not a car someone struggling drives. "You came here to get something," I said. She didn't answer. "No," I continued. "You came here to film something." She shifted, hugging the baby tighter. "What are you talking about?" I turned fast enough to see her reach instinctively toward the side pocket of the diaper bag. There, half exposed, was her phone screen, dark, but I saw the faintest green light at the edge. A recording app. Running. "We just wanted proof," she whispered, "in case you twisted the story." I stared at her for a long moment, then I said calmly, "Let me be clear, Brittany. I'm not your storyline. I'm not your villain. And I sure as hell am not your ATM." She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. "Get out of my room, and take your gift shop baby bag with you." She stood slowly, rocking Emily as if hoping the baby's presence would soften me. It didn't. "She's your granddaughter," Brittany said quietly. I shook my head. "No, she's your child. Raise her better than you treat people." She didn't respond. She just walked stiffly to the door, pulled it open, and stepped out. I watched as she climbed into the SUV and drove off without looking back. When the taillights disappeared, I closed the door and locked it. Then I sat down on the bed without moving. My hands were shaking again, not from fear, from adrenaline, from knowing I had just been baited into saying something cruel on record, something they could twist and post for sympathy, but I hadn't given it to her. I stayed calm, but I wasn't finished. The next morning, I walked 2 blocks to the Whitmore County Courthouse. The woman at the front desk didn't look surprised when I said I wanted to file for a restraining order. I handed her everything: screenshots, the TikTok post, photos of the bag, the recording attempt. I even printed a copy of the retail page showing the diaper bag price. She looked through the file with tired eyes. "You're not the first," she said, "and you won't be the last." The order was submitted before noon. I made 5 copies, one for myself, one for my lawyer, one for the local police department, one for Doreen at the housing board, and one I mailed unsigned to Josh and Brittany's last known address. Inside, I included a single yellow sticky note. "You wanted legal. You got it." Later that night, I forwarded everything, the documents, the screenshots, the filed order, to the Burlington Voice editor. No commentary, no speech, just the headline, "For the record." Because sometimes the only power left is to become undeniable, and that was what I had become. Not their victim, not their mother-in-law, not their shame, just a woman who had receipts. By Margaret Carter. The article ran on a Sunday morning. It didn't go viral. It didn't crash servers or spark nationwide outrage. But it did what truth often does. It lingered. It settled into inboxes, community pages, morning coffee conversations. When help becomes a weapon, one mother's story of financial betrayal. My name was there, in print. Margaret L.Carter. My photo wasn't included by request, but the evidence was: screenshots, bank records, texts, the deed with my signature, the wire receipt for $190,000. No theatrics, just truth, line by line. I read it once, then I closed the laptop. By noon, I started getting calls. Not from Josh, not from Brittany, but from the edges of my life, people who had stood quietly on the sidelines for years. A former neighbor from Maple Hollow. A Sunday school friend from the church I left after Walter passed. Even the pharmacist who used to ask how my son was doing every time I picked up prescriptions. They didn't ask for gossip. They asked if I was okay. In the local community group, the same one where Brittany had once posted, "Urgent, our home is being targeted by a scam," the conversation began to shift. Posts appeared with titles like, "Do aging parents have a right to retain their stake in family homes? Should adult children expect financial support without accountability? What does help look like when it comes at the cost of autonomy?" For the first time, my name didn't appear with eye rolls or pity emojis. It appeared with respect, with questions, with real, difficult discussion, and not just about me, about people like me. Because the truth was, my story wasn't just mine. It was stitched into the lives of so many women I'd passed in grocery aisles, sat beside in waiting rooms, nodded to on church benches. Women who'd raised children and held families together, only to be told quietly, efficiently, that they had become too inconvenient to keep. I wasn't the only one whose silence had been mistaken for weakness. I wasn't the only one who had co-signed her own disappearance. And I wasn't the only one who had finally started to write herself back in. That week, I started walking again. There's a footpath around Lake Whitmore, narrow and cracked, where wildflowers poke through the fences and the benches still have old names carved into the wood. Walter and I used to walk it on Sundays. He'd point out ducks. I'd count chipmunks. The motel was close enough that I could reach the trail before the sun got too high. I'd wear my knit cap, carry a travel mug, and nod politely at joggers and dog walkers who didn't know who I was and didn't care. I liked that. Being unknown, being unbothered. One morning, I passed a folding table set up by the gazebo near the far end of the path. A woman about my age sat behind it, painting seashells with delicate strokes, cobalt blues, soft creams, glints of gold leaf. A handwritten sign read, "Seniors Paint Sip, Tuesdays, Thursdays, 10 a.m., beginners welcome." She caught my eye as I passed. "Pick one," she said, holding out a seashell. "Take whichever calls to you." I hesitated, then reached for a blue one with silver edges. "Good choice," she smiled. "That one's for people who've just let go of something heavy." I blinked once, then smiled back. I slipped the shell into my coat pocket and walked on. That afternoon, I signed up for the class. Not because I needed to learn how to paint, I'd never been especially artistic, but because I wanted to sit in a room where no one asked why I was there. The instructor's name was Walter, coincidentally. 70, retired mailman, suspenders and bad jokes. The kind of man who remembered your name on the second day, even if he couldn't remember where he put his glasses. I painted quietly. A vase, then a lemon, then the lake. No one asked about Josh. No one brought up TikTok. No one tilted their head and asked, "How are you really?" I didn't flinch when someone knocked on the storage room door behind me. I didn't check my phone every 10 minutes. I didn't wake in the middle of the night thinking I'd forgotten something. For the first time in what felt like years, I stopped bracing for the next blow. It was slow at first, this feeling of safety, like stepping into a hot bath 1 inch at a time. But it came. It came in the form of a cashier remembering I liked paper bags instead of plastic. In a neighbor waving from her porch with no follow-up question. In my own breath, steady and unremarkable. The motel was still cramped, still smelled vaguely like fried onions and bleach. But something about it no longer pressed on me. The knocks on the door no longer meant confrontation. The messages no longer meant manipulation. The mirror, cracked slightly at the bottom edge, finally reflected someone I recognized again. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was returning to myself, to my voice, to a space no one could lock or repurpose or ignore. The letter came on a Thursday. It arrived folded in thirds, hand-addressed, postmarked from a P.O. box somewhere outside of Hartford. No return name, just slightly smudged ink, and Andrew's unmistakable handwriting slanted, uneven, as if each word was still unsure of itself. Inside were 4 lines. "I know I can't undo what I did. I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to know I'm trying." I named her Emily Linda Carter. That was all. No, I'm sorry. No reflection. No acknowledgement of the foreclosure, the lies, the silence. Just a name. A gesture. I read it once. Then again. Then I folded the paper and placed it into the bottom drawer of my writing desk, right beside the deed now void, and the photograph of Walter I had finally decided to frame again. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I didn't feel anything I could name. What do you do with a legacy that's equal parts love and damage? You file it away. Not to forget, but to contain. The new apartment sat just 3 blocks from the water's edge in Cape Morro, a sleepy seaside town with too many gulls and too few tourists. The complex was built for retirees and veterans, tucked between a public garden and an old fire station now used for pottery workshops. My unit was on the 2nd floor. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony, and a patch of afternoon light that fell just right across the kitchen floor. It wasn't large, it wasn't grand, but it was mine. I moved in on a Friday. The manager gave me a welcome packet with coupons to the local diner and a community bulletin board listing things like Intro to Knitting and Memoir Circle. I thanked him, though I didn't read any of it. That evening, I opened the windows. The breeze came in soft, laced with sea salt and the faint smell of old wood. I made tea, no longer peppermint. The bitterness reminded me too much of motel rooms, but chamomile now. And I stood barefoot on the little balcony, listening for the ocean I couldn't quite see but knew was there. That was enough. I didn't unpack in a rush. I took my time. 1 drawer a day, 1 corner at a time. I filled the fridge with food I actually wanted. Grapefruit juice, a wheel of brie, fresh dill. I bought 2 houseplants, 1 for the kitchen windowsill, 1 for the nightstand. I placed the seashell I'd picked at the lake, the blue one with silver edges on the countertop next to my keys. I called it peace. Days passed, then a week, then 2. The phone rang sometimes, spam calls, telemarketers. I let them go. Social media stayed off. I didn't check if Brittany had posted anything else. I didn't wonder what Andrew was doing. I didn't ask if the name Emily Linda Carter was meant to honor or haunt me, because in this space, this small, sunlit condo, I had nothing to defend. No image to manage, no legacy to protect, just mornings that belonged to me again. I joined the art class again, this time in the Cape Morro Rec Center. Same bad jokes, different instructor. Her name was Helen. She wore denim overalls and painted birds on driftwood. She asked what brought me to town. I told her, looking for something quieter. She nodded like she understood. One morning, I walked past the bookstore and saw a woman holding a copy of the Burlington Voice. My article was gone from the homepage, but something lingered. A ripple, a whisper of what had been said out loud and without shame. I had told the truth, not because I needed redemption, but because I deserved my place back in the story. I updated my will the following month, removed Andrew's name, left everything what little there was to be split evenly between 3 places: a local shelter for domestic abuse survivors, a literacy program for adult women, and the animal rescue I used to volunteer with before life got too heavy. I sent a single instruction to my lawyer. If he ever challenges this, release everything, publicly, no negotiations. He replied, "Understood." That night, a final text arrived from a number I didn't recognize but knew immediately. "Brittany, we lost everything. Congrats." I read it once, then deleted it. No reply, no reaction, nothing left to say. I packed my things again, not to leave, but to settle in. Properly this time, deliberately. There was no more waiting for doors to open, no more bracing for knocks, no more space I had to shrink into to keep others comfortable. This was mine. I took a walk down the boardwalk at dusk. The wind tousled my hair the way Walter used to when he'd stand behind me and pretend to fluff my soul. I laughed, quietly, then let the sound fade into the breeze. I passed a seafood shack with a chalkboard sign that read, "Try the haddock. Trust us." I made a mental note. Back home, I curled into the couch with a wool blanket and an old paperback. No notifications, no closure emails, no family feuds to manage. Just the quiet sound of a woman choosing herself without permission. The lamp beside me cast a golden light across the room, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was intruding. I belonged, not in someone's basement, not in someone's storyline, in my own space. And as I reached to turn off the light, I whispered the 5 words I'd carried since the day I was pushed out. "No space here either. Goodbye." They said there was no space for me, and in the end, I realized I never needed theirs to begin with. Loiket. There are stories we carry for decades, quiet betrayals, silent departures, small acts of strength no one clapped for. And sometimes, it takes losing everything to realize we never needed their permission to begin again. Margaret's story isn't just about inheritance or betrayal, it's about reclaiming your voice, even if it trembles, even if it's late. Maybe you've lived something similar. Maybe you're still holding your breath inside someone else's house, waiting to be welcomed. Or maybe, like Margaret, you've already stepped into your own space, small, sunlit, but finally yours. If this story stirred something in you, speak, write. Whisper your truth into a quiet room. You are not alone. We hope you'll like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter so you never miss another story of dignity, resilience, and the quiet power of women who've been written off but never erased. Your next chapter starts when you're ready. We'll be here when it does.